Today at the National Press Club, the same-sex marriage debate. Liberal Senator Cory Bernardi is against legalising gay marriage. Labor Senate leader Penny Wong is for it. Both are from South Australia and both vocal advocates for their side of the debate. Here's Cory Bernardi and Penny Wong at the National Press Club.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. In late May, Ireland became the latest country to embrace marriage equality when a majority of country people there voted yes in a referendum. A month later, the US Supreme Court ruled that the American Constitution provides same-sex couples with the right to marry. Here in Australia, we are at a pivotal moment in the debate over same-sex marriage, and the Press Club is delighted to host a debate today with two forceful advocates on either side of the debate. When Parliament resumes in a couple of weeks' time, a cross-party bill will be presented to the House of Representatives Table's office in support of same-sex marriage, but there is no certainty that coalition MPs will be granted a free vote on this contentious issue. Can I introduce the speakers for today? Firstly, Cory Bernardi. Cory Bernardi has been a senator for South Australia since 2006. He has been an outspoken critic of the move towards same-sex marriage, and we will hear his comments today. Our first speaker today from South Australia as well is Senator Penny Wong. Penny has been in the Senate since 2002 and she is Leader of the Opposition in the Senate. Penny Wong will speak first today. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Senator Wong.
The nature of marriage is that through its enduring bond, two persons together can find other freedoms, such as expression, intimacy, and spirituality. This is true for all persons, whatever their sexual orientation. Those were the words of Justice Anthony Kennedy when he delivered the opinion of the United States Supreme Court last month upholding the constitutional right of same-sex couples to marry. And I was reminded of an earlier decision of the US Supreme Court, one in 1967, in which the court struck down laws which existed in several American states banning interracial marriage. Like the referendum in Ireland, these milestones remind us that the principle of equality can overcome discrimination. They remind us of the simple power of the maxim, equal treatment before the law. In Australia today, two citizens who love each other and who wish to make a public declaration of their mutual and exclusive commitment through the ceremony of marriage are prohibited from doing so, solely on the basis of their gender. No other attribute, no other disqualification, simply because they are of the same gender. If the disqualifying attribute were race or age or religion, such a proposition would be rightly seen as bizarre. But it remains our law in respect of same-sex couples. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has located the campaign to remove discrimination against lesbian and gay people with other campaigns against discrimination. And he says, opposing apartheid was a matter of justice, opposing discrimination against women is a matter of justice, and opposing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is a matter of justice. Australians pride ourselves on our egalitarianism, a fair go for all. Equality is central to our egalitarian spirit, a part of our national identity. We see the expression of this through our history. Women once were denied the vote, were paid less, and had to resign from the public service once married. The children of Aboriginal Australians were once taken away. Times have changed. Misogyny and discrimination haven't been eliminated, but they are no longer entrenched in law. And the institution of marriage has evolved too. The Reverend Dr. Margaret Mayman notes that marriage has its origin in the more mundane realities of property, procreation and patriarchy. And she observes, all over the Western world, the movement to transform marriage is underway. However, it is not gay and lesbian people who have been transforming marriage, it is heterosexuals. It is precisely because heterosexuals have changed marriage from an economic arrangement to a relationship of love and support that gay and lesbian people are seeking to join it. And I see progress too in different ways. In the change in attitude since I was first elected to our federal parliament, in the easygoing acceptance of the families and staff at our childcare centre, in the generosity of the men and women who stop me in the street or at the airport from all walks of life who tell me to press on, in the kind emails and cards and gifts received when our daughters were born, not only from friends, but from strangers. And I see it in the many who have joined the campaign for equality. Activists, business leaders, unionists, sporting heroes, the parents of gay and lesbian children, and so many more have voiced their support for equality. It's time our national parliament heeded the call for change from the Australian community. Australians understand there's nothing to fear from equality, yet so many in our government stubbornly cling to discriminatory laws. And over time, the arguments against equality have become increasingly irrational. The bogeyman of the slippery slope or warnings about our relations with Asia simply don't stack up as reasons to deny equality. And we also see the well-being of our children marshalled to the cause of discrimination. Leave aside for a moment the truth that the quality of parenting is altogether more complex than simple assertions about gender. The reality is this: same-sex couples already have children. Marriage equality will not alter that. What continued inequality does is deny these children the opportunity to be part of a family which benefits from the stability and security of marriage. As the Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, says, marriage equality is important because society is stronger when we make vows to each other and we support each other. And let me address the faith-based argument against marriage equality. Remember that what we are proposing does not mandate marriage in our religious institutions. It relates only to civil marriage, to the legal treatment of relationships by the secular state. The proposition that those opposing want you to accept is that the secular state, through its laws, should prohibit marriage between two people because of the religious tenets of some faiths. It's a proposition which flies in the face of our philosophical and legal understandings of the relationship between church and state. But beyond all of these arguments of principle, I would like you to recall that this is more than a theoretical debate. Much more. This is a debate about real people. We are your brothers and your sisters, your sons and your daughters, your friends and your fellow Australians. And this is a debate about us, a debate about rights, a debate about intimate and personal relationships, a debate about the people we love. Most of us hope to find the person we want to share our life with, the person we love. Not all of us are lucky enough to do so, and not all of us are able to hold on to it. But if we do, and are prepared to make that commitment, to declare that enduring bond of which Justice Kennedy spoke, surely that ought to be celebrated and not feared. Do we really think in 2015 that the state should say to people prepared to make that promise to each other, no, you can't? I say it should not. Australians say it should not. Justice Kennedy said, the nature of injustice is that we may not always see it in our own times. Well, Australians do see the injustice of denying marriage equality. Australians in same-sex relationships experience that injustice every day. And if we achieve marriage equality, most things won't change. The sun will rise, heterosexual marriages won't crumble. 3-year-olds will still want more ice cream than is good for them. But together we would have made a profound change. A statement to lesbian and gay Australians that we belong, that we are accepted, that our relationships matter too. And it will also be a statement about the Australia we have become, an accepting, diverse and inclusive nation. And that, friends, is something to which we should aspire. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Wong, for those opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, would you now please welcome Senator Bernardi to make his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you to the Press Club for putting on this debate today. 9 years ago, in my maiden speech to the Senate, I said, one could argue that the entire concept of rights has been so debased in recent times that it is now difficult to know what is a right and what is simply a desire. Because desires are governed and formed by personal belief and self-interest, and yet they're often presented in the public sphere as a right to correct a perceived wrong. Now, ironically, in this new culture of rights, we're often taken into the realm of a contest in deciding whose rights should prevail. And the homosexual marriage debate is a clear example of this contest. Marriage is not a right. It was not invented. Marriage simply is. Marriage has been reserved as a sacred bond between a man and a woman across times, across cultures, and across very different religious beliefs. It is the very foundation of the family, and the family is the basic unit of society. And thus marriage is a personal relationship with public significance, and I believe we're right to recognise it in our laws. Now, despite marriage being based in accordance with millennia of lived experience, we are now facing the 16th attempt in the last 10 years to redefine it to mean something it has never meant. And it's been done in the names of rights and equality. Now, both words have been used by the same-sex lobby in a textbook propaganda campaign to convince people to support their cause. The term marriage equality is a masterpiece of sloganeering, even though it's got no basis in reality, because in 2008, the Federal Parliament removed legal discrimination between same-sex couples. And in fact, during that debate, some of us sought to include all interdependent relationships in the bill. These relationships are often non-sexual in nature, but they're based around shared love and shared lives. And the argument for that equality was rejected by the same-sex marriage lobby. They also rejected the equality case of religious or cultural traditions involving more than one spouse. So I believe, and I think it's crystal clear, this campaign is not about equality, but it's about personal desire and self-interest of a vocal minority. In the last census, there were 33,714 same-sex couples that chose to disclose their relationships. That's a very small group indeed. And we're told by the same-sex marriage advocates that 72% of those Australians support redefining marriage, and whilst they also seek to paint those who support the time-honoured traditional definition as offensive, we've been called bigots, we're told homophobes, or worse. And on the name-calling, once again, it's simply another well-known propaganda technique designed to silence an alternative voice. I believe it's crude, I think it smacks of hypocrisy and intolerance, but it is very effective in silencing many from sharing their view. Which takes me back to the polls. Many polls reflect a vastly different view from that espoused by the same-sex marriage lobby. By a margin of 3 to 1, Australians believe the right to marry includes the right to raise a family, and where possible, that child should be raised by both the mother and father. By a margin of 3 to 1, Australians think it is more important that a child should have a mum and a dad than that two men should have the right to marry and create a family. And when surveyed, 90% of mothers have agreed that a mother's love for a child could not be replaced. And yet, despite these results, the campaign to change the very nature of marriage and families, in effect denying the rights of children to have the opportunity to have a mum and a dad, is being pursued relentlessly. And it's all been done in the name of rights. And I know it's going to be maybe unpopular in this room and it might be called quaint and old-fashioned, but where I come from, it is children who have rights and it is adults who have responsibilities. But that very concept is being turned on its head by the advocates for this cause. Because if you grant the right to marry for same-sex couples, one logically cannot deny their right to a family, which immediately impacts the right of a child. And Professor Margaret Somerville wrote, "It is one matter for children not to know their genetic identity as a result of unintended circumstances. It is quite another matter to deliberately destroy children's links to their biological parents, and especially for society to be complicit in this destruction." Now, I cannot and I will not deny that some same-sex couples make much, much better parents than some married heterosexual couples. However, it doesn't change the general principle that the ideal is still being a child being raised by the married mother and father. It's a sentiment that 7 out of 10 Australians agree with. Now, I've always been of the view that what other countries do should not dictate Australia's self-determination. However, I do want to comment briefly on the recent decisions in Ireland and the USA. In the case of Ireland, the same-sex marriage advocates ran a splendid campaign. I believe they invested about $25 million, and that virtually left their opponents voiceless in the public sphere. But it is my view, and as a Catholic, it pains me to say this, but I nonetheless believe it to be true, that the result was influenced by the past practices, the dogmatic rule, and some of the hypocrisy of the Church in Ireland. In the USA, the circumstances were somewhat different. The equality advocates didn't like the people or the legislatures having their say. They wanted the unelected and politically compromised judiciary to force nationwide acceptance of same-sex marriage. This they did in a 5-4 vote that found some new constitutional right that hadn't existed since the American Constitution had been written. Which brings me back to where I began, the concept of competing rights and determining whose should prevail. If same-sex marriage becomes a reality in Australia, do religious institutions or people of faith have the right to not participate or not to provide services to a same-sex wedding? Will teachers and schools be compelled to endorse same-sex marriages in their classroom? Will even speaking in favour of traditional marriage be deemed offensive and the speaker subject to sanction? All around the world, the same-sex marriage advocates have maintained that will not be the case until they get marriage redefined. Then the process of eroding the rights of others begins. Charities, businesses and individuals that do not support homosexual marriage have been sacked, forced to close or change their practices because of their beliefs. Florists, photographers and bakers, they've been taken to court or forced to pay thousands of dollars in fines for exercising their right not to act contrary to their conscience. Churches have been compelled to officiate in same-sex marriage ceremonies, and teachers have been stood down for publicly supporting traditional marriage. But of course, we're told that such coercive infringement on personal liberty and freedom of speech will not happen here. Unfortunately, it's too late. It's already begun. Just a few weeks ago, the convener of the same-sex marriage campaign encouraged people to lodge discrimination complaints against the Catholic Church because it decided to support the Catholic view of marriage through their school system. A view, by the way, that is actually entirely consistent with Australian law. So one can only imagine what actions might happen if those laws were to change. So let me be clear in summing up. There are many things redefining marriage won't do, but there are many things that redefining marriage might do, and if overseas experience is any guide, it will do. It will lead to calls for further redefinitions using exactly the same arguments of equality made by the same-sex marriage advocates today. It will become a constant battleground of competing rights between individuals and businesses. The freedom to speak differently, to work differently, conduct a business differently based on personal belief and choice will all of a sudden be regulated and controlled by an already bloated discrimination industry. I believe there is no need to redefine marriage on the basis of equality. To do so is to live in a dictatorship of relativism, where nothing is real, truths are denied, and if they're considered inconvenient by the politically correct system. Marriage should remain what it has always been, the enduring union of a man and a woman to complement the raising of a family and the interests of the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bernardi. Just before we head to questions, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to follow this debate on Twitter, you can using the Twitter handle @PressClub AUST, or the hashtag NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now move to questions. Our first question is from Catalina Flores.
Thank you very much. Catalina Flores from Network 10. Cory Bernardi, do you still believe that legalising same-sex marriage will lead to bestiality and polygamy? And Penny Wong, you've in the past described these comments as a pathetic attempt to drum up fear and prejudice. I'm just wondering, have either of you moved from these positions?
Senator Bernardi, would you like to go?
Catalina, I'm not sure if you've ever read my comments in this regard before, but I never said it would lead to that. I merely said that Australians, that if we redefine marriage, it would lead to further calls for redefinition and for other relationship types to be in there. I don't know where that will lead. But let me make this point. That's been borne true. Because in England, if you go there and you want to examine what's happening there, the Greens Party is now considering, lobbying for multi-member relationships to be included in the marriage campaign. In Brazil, you're seeing judges say, well, how can I logically deny more than one person to have the same rights as a married couple? The same thing has happened in the Netherlands. It is taking place all around the world. Now, if we're going to redefine marriage to include one section of the community that has never been included in it before, how can we logically deny others who are going to use the same rights it's the same words that you can't choose who you love, we just want our love to be acknowledged and our relationship to be endorsed. It's a logical argument and it's been borne true by evidence and the lived experience overseas.
Senator Wong.
Thank you. Well, I would suggest to anybody who doesn't think Cory said what he said to consider the Hansard, that I think it's quite clear what was said. I stand by my previous comments and I think those statements are what I referred to in my speech as the slippery slope argument, aren't they? I would say to Cory, if you want a commitment from me that I would stand with you in a defence against bestiality being recognised at law, I'm happy to give that today.
You should take that up with Peter Singleton.
I would make this point though in his speech, and we see it again in this to some extent in this response. Those who want equality are referred to as the vocal minority, despite the fact the majority of Australians have indicated their support for marriage equality. I would say this point. We don't shout you down. We don't denigrate your relationships. We don't suggest your children are somehow compromised. So who are the people hurling insults in this debate?
Our next question is from Tim Lester.
Thanks, Steve. Tim Lester from 7 News. Senator Bernardi, the night before last, our news service reported that the Prime Minister had canvassed at least some within the government on the option of a plebiscite on this question in 2019 or thereabouts, perhaps as a means of delaying any parliamentary vote on the issue beforehand. Can I ask, have you been canvassed in that regard by anyone in the government? Is it a live option, and what do you think of the suggestion? Can I ask you, Senator Wong, what you think of the suggestion of a plebiscite on this issue any time as a way of dealing with it? And can I also ask, given Labor has just agreed as a party to 2019 as a reasonable wait time for going to a full party support for same-sex marriage, haven't you in effect opened the door for the government to argue that a wait till 2019 is actually okay?
Cory, do you want to go first?
Sure. Tim, the first I knew of that report was when I read it in the paper the next day. But let me deal with the substantive issue. The Constitution empowers the Parliament to deal with marriage. And I think the Parliament has dealt with that because it's been presented with 16 bills over the last 10 years and it hasn't endorsed any of them. The question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue down the path of we're going to introduce 3 bills a year, or we've had 2 and there's another one expected, for the Parliament to decide until it's a war of attrition and people give up? Or, should we look at other options? And that's maybe a live option. I don't know. Maybe if the Parliament, people are not satisfied with the parliamentary decision and determination, maybe it should be put to the people and say if a majority of people in a majority of states want this to change to happen, go. But I'm not endorsing that. I think the Parliament should deal with it, but I think the Parliament has dealt with it.
Penny Wong.
Well, I think the plebiscite idea is a delaying tactic from a Prime Minister who is worried and whose supporters are worried that they might actually be losing the numbers for a cross-party bill. And I think we need to be clear about the motivation. A plebiscite would not be binding. Of course, spending is unregulated. The Prime Minister sets the question. And I think I'd invite people to consider whether or not it would be a polarising debate given the tenor of some people's arguments. But more importantly than this, the High Court has made it very clear whose responsibility marriage laws are. They are the responsibility of the Federal Parliament. And at the moment, we have a free vote. At the moment, they don't. Cory and other people inside the Liberal Party who are vehemently opposed to progress on this front have made it very clear they will do anything to avoid a free vote.
Every vote is a free vote in the Liberal Party.
You and I both know that's... you and I both
entirely
know.
True.
We know before the last election, Tony Abbott said that if a bill were before the party room, it would go to the... if a bill were before the Parliament, it would go to the party room in the usual way. It has not done so. I really do want to lay on the record my respect for those members of the Liberal and National parties who have been prepared, despite the views of some in their party room and their Prime Minister, to come out for the cause of equality.
Our next question is from Peter Jean from the Adelaide Advertiser.
Peter Jean from the Advertiser. It's great to see two South Australians debating this issue.
People might take it both ways, Peter.
They might. Senator Wong, I wanted to give you the opportunity to address a couple of the concerns that Senator Bernardi has voiced today and that others who oppose same-sex marriage also raise. The issue is frequently raised, on the slippery slope argument, will this lead to a push for multi-member relationships to be able to recognise as marriages? So I want to ask you, would you be willing to support any move to change the definition of marriage to recognise multi-member relationships?
No.
And fair enough. And in terms of this issue that is frequently raised about business owners who have a conscientious objection to same-sex marriage, potentially facing legal penalties for failing to provide services, is that a real concern those people should have? Would they face potentially legal action if they refuse to assist same-sex marriages or weddings?
Well, thank you for the question. Although I have to say, I sometimes think we look for problems, but I appreciate that this has been raised in the public debate by others, but we sort of try to get into the detail of how something might work as a way of saying, well, we shouldn't do it at all. But I guess what I'd say is this: I suspect the market will probably resolve most of it. I suspect that gay and lesbian couples are unlikely to go to bakers who really don't like gay and lesbians. So I suspect we'd probably work it out. I think so. I'm not sure it will be as much of an issue as some suggest. Look, our existing system of anti-discrimination laws does have a whole range of exemptions. Let's recall, not all discrimination is contrary to our discrimination laws. So I think if this were to happen, those would be the sorts of discussions that would need to be had about how do you recognise that in how are those circumstances recognised in our current anti-discrimination laws. So that's a discussion which no doubt would be had. I think the most important issue though is to do as I said in my opening, which is to recognise that the separation between church and state, and that religious institutions ought not be required to preside over ceremonies between gay and same-sex couples if that does not accord with their beliefs.
Senator Bernardi, do you want to? Well, thank you. On the first point, it was interesting that Penny was so happy to rule out multi-member unions or redefining marriage further. And that says to me that she's got a line in the sand, as we all do, about what marriage should mean and what it should encompass. Some people are in the traditional definition, and there are incremental changes that others would want to pursue in that regard. So it's not about equality for all, it's only about equality for some, apparently. Now, the second substantive issue is you have to look at the lived experience overseas. And we can give all the promises we like here, but it's the same tactics, the same results we can expect. And overseas we've had enormous issues with people's freedoms being curtailed on the basis of changes to same-sex marriage, or changes to marriage.
I see that Cory's desperately holding on to the slippery slope argument, but I think there is a very big difference between making a decision to discriminate or treat differently on the basis of the number of people, as opposed to a decision to discriminate only on the basis that the two people are of the same gender. I think they are different propositions, and I think in today's society the latter really flies in the face of the notion of equality of treatment before the law.
We will move on. Our next question is from Judith Ireland.
Judith Ireland from the Sydney Morning Herald. My question's to Senator Bernardi. Senator, I wanted to ask you why there's so much focus on children in the same-sex marriage debate when same-sex couples can already have children and they already are having children. I wanted to also ask what you make of the analysis that it would actually be better for these children, for their parents to be able to get married in terms of providing more stability for the relationship.
It's an interesting question, Judith. There is a focus on children, and as I said, it's because I believe that the rights of children tend to trump the rights of adults in many respects. And I make no bones about it. Some same-sex parents do a much better job of raising kids than do heterosexual parents. There are dysfunctional parents, and no matter what sphere there is. There is a slight difference, though, in the sense that a same-sex couple can't produce children alone. They need assistance from a third party, and you know that makes a difference to I guess the relationship for that child in some respects. But I would put to you, if a child is loved, if a child is nurtured, if it is developed and supported, you know that's all we can really hope for in a child. But there is a different role that a father plays and a mother plays. They're complementary roles. I think they have a different impact in how they engage with their children. I don't think you can easily dismiss the role of one, and I don't think you should deliberately dismiss it. But I have to acknowledge there are plenty of circumstances where that's not the case, and the children, you know, come out perfectly fine and well developed and well balanced. Right? So, but I just don't think it's in society's interest to deliberately deny those complementary inputs into a child's development.
Senator Wong?
Well, I think the arguments against marriage equality ignore the proposition you put in your question, Judith, which is we already have children. So it's not actually, whatever people's views about children, it's not actually the issue in the marriage equality debate, as much as some people wish to make it so. I think children need to be loved and nurtured, treated with fairness and firmness. I think that if we want to have a discussion about how we try and support all families to bring their children up in that way, I'm happy to have that discussion. But that's a very different proposition to saying, well, we have to exclude some people from the institution of marriage.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Our next question is from Rosie Lewis.
Rosie Lewis from the Australian newspaper. To you, Senator Bernardi, we understand coalition MPs are expected to face a debate on whether to have a free vote very soon or in this term of Parliament. Is that how you see it? I also wanted to ask you to expand on what you meant when you said that marriage wasn't invented. And Senator Wong, how concerned are you that if there was a free vote in the government party room, that perhaps it wouldn't get up?
Senator Bernardi?
Well, the first part of your question was in respect to the deliberations in the coalition party room. I have no, special knowledge or inside knowledge about what's going to happen there, when it's going to happen, or anything else. But I would make the point that our party, probably one of its longest-standing policy positions, from when my party was founded in the late 1940s, it was never envisaged that marriage would be anything different, and than what it is. And when there was a push on in the late 90s, the response from my party was to codify in 2004 that marriage was between a man and a woman. That was supported by the Labor Party and the Coalition, and that's the Marriage Act we have today. So we endorsed, if you will, what was just an unwritten rule in 2004. There's never been any proposal to change that. And I want to go back to this point that was dismissed so easily by Senator Wong. In the Coalition, we have this time-honoured principle that if you disagree with the party policy, you can cross the floor on that. Some of us have done that. because we're interested in the policy, the substance of it. If my colleagues choose to do that, that's entirely up to them. But I don't believe it's in the coalition's interest. I don't think it's in the national interest, quite frankly, for the Liberal Party to change its position. That's why I'm advocating for it.
Senator Wong?
Well, first, we will only achieve marriage equality if there are members of the coalition who are prepared to support it, both in the party room and in the parliament. And I think that will be the case for some time. I think that I do worry about the coalition party room, and the reason I worry is that it's been so clear from the public statements of some on the other side of this debate how aggressively they will pursue their interests. I mean, we've had Liberal senators calling for people to step down from the front bench. We've had a very aggressive set of interventions in the debate from the Leader of the Government in the Senate and others. And it's quite clear that whilst there might be a free vote in theory, there isn't a free vote in practice. There isn't a permission in the party room to say, actually, you know what, we are actually going to have a genuine conscience vote on this issue, a genuinely free vote, because people have different views.
Would you like me to respond to the second part of the question? And in doing so, I'd just like to make this point. Principle is very important in politics, and when Senator Wong was the Finance Minister, and she was asked on Q&A about same-sex marriage, and it wasn't her party's policy, she said, I don't have a position other than the Cabinet position. That is an important principle of Cabinet solidarity. Now, we're in exactly the same circumstance today for the Coalition. We're in government. We have a policy position. It should be expected that front benches uphold that.
Toe the line.
That's
you want them to toe the line.
It's indeed what it's about. That's cabinet solidarity, ministerial
but that's not a free
responsibility. The second, anyway, going back to the substance of your question, marriage wasn't invented because it was never defined. It emerged by the fact that there was a man and a woman who were joining in a union, and generally that union was about procreation. Sometimes it was about money. Sometimes it was about companionship. But this is going back for thousands of years. It was never defined. It has never been sought. It just emerged as the way it should be. And what the proposal is now is to change those years and centuries of lived experience to turn it into something that it never has been.
We will move on. Our next question is from Tom Connell.
Tom Connell from Sky News. Senator Bernardi, if I could ask again on the children aspect, I know you've outlined why you think it's better for so-called traditional couples to raise children, but the argument itself to do with same-sex marriage, are you saying there would be more of those children if it could come with marriage, because obviously already same-sex couples can have children? And just more broadly, you've got a Prime Minister at the moment who's a traditional Conservative, who's always been a strong advocate for traditional marriage, but even he is seeming to consider there's some momentum in this issue, talking about his party getting a say. If even he is saying that, do you see this as inevitable, or in 100 years' time, do you really think Australia will stand perhaps as almost a lone Western nation, at least, as still not having same-sex marriage?
I'd hate to predict what's going to happen in 100 years' time, let me tell you that. I don't think anything is inevitable. It's been said death and taxes are inevitable, and there's people working to, stop those two things happening as well. I just don't believe there's inevitability about it. And that sort of argument was being put forward to the Republic referendum in 1999. We spent the whole of the 90s saying how popular it was and how it was going to happen, and it had to happen, and it was rejected comprehensively. More recently, we had the emissions trading scheme debate, how it was inevitable, and the Liberal Party was going to die a slow death if it opposed this action on climate change and stuff, and all the polls showed one thing, and the opposite was actually true. I just don't buy into something that just because it appears popular, it's the right thing to do for the country. And in respect to the Prime Minister, look, he's allowed to have his view, as are other people in our party, and we're allowed to voice them. I think that's an important thing, and the Prime Minister is upholding the party's position. If there's going to be a discussion and debate in our party, I expect it to be robust and vigorous, but I do not believe that a majority of my party room want to see same-sex marriage introduced. Just on children, look, it comes back to, I guess, the natural order of things, if you will, that a man and a woman get together and they have a child, and they raise that child together, and there's a complementarity in the inputs that they have into it. Now, that's not to deny that children can be very successful and enjoy wonderful, robust lives with same-sex couples or single parents or anything else. But there are always consequences to this. And, people like Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and others have all acknowledged that there are societal consequences when you remove a father from a child's relationship or a mother from a child's relationship, particularly intentionally.
Penny Wong?
Well, just a few things. First, on that latter point, I think we shouldn't assume, as Senator Bernardi is, that our children don't have relationships with role models of both genders, which seems to be the assumption, or with biological parents. The second thing I was going to say, though, is Cory's actually just said something with which I agree, which might be the first time tonight. But he said that nothing's inevitable, and I agree with him on that. The example he uses of a republic is a very good one, because it is an example where the Conservative side of politics, including the current Prime Minister, did manage to run a successful campaign against a republic despite there being majority support. And so what I would say to the people in this room who support marriage equality and to Australians watching is progress is never made and reform is never won without us achieving it, without us fighting for it. And we will have to continue to do so.
Our next question, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Our next question is from David Alexander.
Hi, David Alexander from the Star Observer. So this is a question for Cory Bernardi. In your address, you mentioned the Crosby-Textor poll, which indicated 72% of Australians supporting marriage equality. In that poll, over 53% evidently of Christians in Australia indicated support for marriage equality, and numerous other polls have indicated that religious groups are in majority support of marriage equality. Do you find yourself, are you actually speaking for a minority of Christians in Australia?
Well, thank you for the question. I don't believe that's the case at all. If you go back to the 1,000 people that were surveyed by Crosby-Textor, and the real issue is what question is asked, quite frankly. 48%, I think, of people, so less than a majority of them, strongly supported same-sex marriage. I think in the Christian tradition that people believe that marriage is a sacred institution and it should be retained as being between a man and a woman. That's the feedback I overwhelmingly get. But that's not to say there aren't people who are Christians and are people of strong faith that think, well, no harm will become of this, and why can't we do it? I mean, that's, people can agree to disagree on particular things. We see it in various churches. I know there are people of very strong faith that want to see this change. But I don't believe it's a majority of Christians want to go down this path, just as I don't believe it's a majority of Muslims or a majority of Buddhists or any other religion or Jews. It's just one of those things that people will have different views.
Oh, well, I think Cory's conceded that there is obviously there are a range of views within religious traditions on this issue, and certainly some of what has been said by Christians who are supportive of marriage equality, frankly, has, I think, been a very rewarding contribution to the debate. Unfortunately, sometimes who has the loudest voice and who gives the quote to the paper that gets the run sometimes gets people believe that they speak for all people of faith, and that's not necessarily true.
Thank you. Our next question is from Shalala Medora.
Hello, Shalala Medora from the Guardian. My question is really for both of you, Senators. In Australia, we have a very pluralistic society. This debate always seems to be very polarised. Isn't our society and aren't our laws strong enough to hold both of these opinions together in concurrency? For example, we have a lot of religious exemptions already for things like vaccination, voting, a whole manner of things that seem to work very well. Why can't both of your views be accepted, and I guess why can't we move forward as a society with both of these things in hand?
Penny Wong, would you like to?
Well, I thought that's what the course that those of us on the side of marriage equality were actually advocating. We recognise there is a distinction between religious marriage, a marriage within religious institutions, and civil marriage, that is marriage that is recognised by the secular state. The proposition Cory and others wish to put is that because of the religious views of some, the secular state, on behalf of all of you, should tell us we're not allowed to marry. That's the proposition. That's not coexistence. That is simply saying not allowed.
Senator Bernardi.
Well, I would make the point that I believe they do coexist currently, but marriage has always been defined as being between a man and a woman, and we're seeking to redefine that. Some people are seeking to redefine it because they want entry into that club, if you will. But they're still entitled to register their relationships. They're still entitled to all the benefits that accrue to de facto relationships or married relationships. There is no discrimination under law. They can call it what they like. They can have celebrations. They can do things. They can register it with the government. There is no difference. But I just don't see that there's any need to redefine one of our longest standing institutions to mean something that it's never meant.
Our next question is from Elise Scott.
Elise Scott from Australian Associated Press. My question is for Senator Bernardi. You say that you don't think there's enough support within your party for same-sex marriage, but do you think you have enough support to block a free vote or to stop a free vote going ahead? Now, if a free vote was to go ahead, would that then trigger maybe a split away from the Liberal Party? Maybe you could start the Bernardi Party. Could you remain...
It'd be a small party,
But honestly, could you remain a member of a party that didn't oppose same-sex marriage?
To abandon the field of having a position on marriage, I think would be... I think it's foolish for a political party to say, no, we don't have a position on that. I think Labor's come to that term as well. They're trying to take it in baby steps, if you will, but ultimately in 2 or 3 years' time, they're going to have a binding vote, no conscience votes, nothing in their party to support the redefinition of marriage. So it's not about allowing people a free vote, because Labor's demonstrated they don't really want that. In the Liberal Party, I just think it's in our interest. It's in our interest to maintain the status quo and to continue to do that. If people in my party disagree with that, they're free to vote according to how they'd like to. And in respect to if the party abandoned that position, look, I'll fight tooth and nail to keep it. Honestly, I think it is really important to that party. But I'm a Liberal through and through. I subscribe to Liberal Party principles, the enduring principles and values. I don't blow with the wind. There's a principled framework around all of my decisions. It doesn't always sit comfortably with rooms like this or the Q&A audience or even the press gallery or even some in my own party, but they're consistent and they're logical about how I approach issues.
Can I just ask a question then, Cory? If you ascribe to the principles of liberalism, Liberals believe in the freedom of the individual. The position you're asserting, particularly in relation to the party room, is in fact a sort of collective dictatorship where, the views of the many have to be imposed on the views of all.
Senator Wong, you were very happy for that sort of policy to go forward when, you wanted us to support the emissions trading scheme. I mean, let's just go. You can't pick and choose when you want it to happen. The fact is...
I'm just asking, how does it describe itself?
Our party has a position, and we also have that great Liberal tradition where individuals can vote against the party if their conscience tells them to. The substantial difference between my party and your party is you can't do that without being thrown out. That's a substantive difference.
Well, we actually have a free vote currently.
And you didn't argue for a free vote those years ago.
No,
you didn't argue for it last week, and in fact, you've changed the policy because if it doesn't come to pass,
you've got plenty of time for it.
I'm delighted you've got plenty of time.
We've got a free vote for plenty of time. Plenty of time for you to catch up.
You can't ask us to have a free vote when you've been campaigning since you wanted to change the policy, not to have a free vote, and to bind people in your party who have a conscientious objection to it to vote according to how you want, and otherwise you'll throw them out.
I still don't have an answer on the liberalism point.
Well, liberalism is the freedom of the individual, but as a party, we have principles and we have values that people generally subscribe to when they get into it.
So people are free unless the principles that you believe in are transgressed. Is that how it works? it's a genuine question. Anyway,
You know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to parlay Labor Party dogmatic policy objectives with the Liberal Party, in which we have general principles, we establish party policy positions, and then people are free to disagree with them if that's the case.
We might move on. Much I enjoyed the debate on liberalism. Our next question is from a champion of liberalism, in fact, Fleur Anderson.
Well, we've been... Yes, of course. Now, we've been talking a lot about the differences, but you do have a bit of common ground in being both from Adelaide. And
I think that's it.
I'm just wondering whether there may be a bit of common ground that you can find in the talk about freedoms and rights and the controversy that's going on at the moment about Adam Goodes and the booing that's going on in the AFL. And I understand that the Adelaide Crows are playing against the Swans in Sydney this weekend. So I just wonder, in the spirit of liberalism, free choice, all this sort of thing, whether you've got any advice to Adelaide supporters.
Cheer your team on, and make them win. Look, there is common ground. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Both Senator Wong and myself agree that if there's going to be any change to marriage, we have to make sure that there are protections for people's individual freedoms, whether they be based on religious or ethical or any other motivations. In respect to the footy, the footy's a pretty robust game. The supporters are pretty robust. I hope they do the right thing, but I don't believe that, for example, the booing is generally racially motivated. I just think they just don't like the other team and they don't like some of the players in it, and that's part of football. I've always encouraged my kids not to boo at the football because they applaud good play on the other side, but it's a bit tribal.
Penny Wong.
I first want to place on the public record I'm a Port supporter. And to be honest, I haven't followed all that has been written about the Adam Goodes incident, because we've had a busy weekend and then I had to prep for this. But what I would say is this: I think there is a very big difference between people having a go at you because you're not playing well, you're from the other team, or because people think you're no good, to people having a go because of your race. And I think people understand that. I think that Australians do understand that it feels different if you're criticised for an attribute, which has been the subject of prejudice at different times in your life. And I don't think that has any place in sport, no matter how robust the game is.
Thank you, Senator Wong. We've got time for one final question today from Andrew Tillett.
Andrew Tillett from the West Australian. Senator Wong, I want to get you to maybe gaze a bit into the crystal ball. I know politicians don't like answering hypothetical questions, but let's say the Liberal Party do agree to have a free vote. We do have a vote this year on a private member's bill in Parliament and it gets defeated. What happens next for campaigners? And Senator Bernardi, just on a plebiscite, if a plebiscite is held and there is a majority support, as you said, in the majority of states for same-sex marriage, would you then be prepared to vote for it, to accept the will of the people in Parliament and put your name down to vote in favour of same-sex marriage?
Senator Wong?
I think we are closer now to succeeding on a marriage equality bill if the Liberal Party provide a free vote than we have ever been. And whether or not we can succeed depends on many things. The decision inside the party room, the campaign that the community can make to their members and senators. But what I would say to you, I don't need a crystal ball to know that people's desire for equality is remarkably persistent. And I think that LGBTI Australians and our allies are not going to go away on this issue. We will keep going because, the principle of equality is something we do hold dear, and I think something most Australians in respect of this matter agree with.
Senator Bernardi, on the issue of a plebiscite, whether you'd be...
Look, I'm not advocating for a plebiscite, but I'm just saying if the Parliament continues to go through, bill after bill after bill, and it continues to get rejected, well, we have to decide it one way or another in a decisive manner. And quite frankly, if there was a majority of states and that said, and a majority of people in a majority of states said that's what we want to redefine marriage to open up to same-sex couples, who am I to argue with that? Quite frankly.
Thanks very much, Cory. We now move to summaries from our two speakers. Penny Wong will speak first.
Thank you very much. This has been an interesting debate in many ways, but what I would say to you is that what we have heard from the other side are the same old, tired arguments that we've always heard. And fundamentally, the position that Senator Bernardi and many on his side have is that LGBTI Australians, same-sex couples, are really not equal. And they point to many things that they say you should worry about or be scared about. And I say this to you, let's lift the gaze. Let's look at what we can be. Because marriage equality is about just that. It's about equality. It's not about treating people differently. It's about equal treatment before the law. Something we do in every sphere of our life. It's time, friends, to make the change. It's time for marriage equality. Thank you.
Senator Bernardi.
Well, once again, I will suggest to you that marriage equality is a catchy slogan, but it has no meaning in reality, because there is no legal discrimination between same-sex couples and how they are treated, except for the categorisation of their relationship as not being married couple. And that's because marriage has always stood as a heterosexual union since time immemorial. And the consequences of changing that are not as simple as just allowing one group of people to join in. It's broad-ranging and quite significant, and we're seeing the impact of those consequences internationally. We have to observe the lived experience, and we have to recognise that marriage has always been a sacred bond between a man and a woman, and I believe it should remain that way.
Ladies and gentlemen, to both our speakers, thank you very much for speaking today. To our audience, thank you for being respectful for both our speakers. This is an issue that's going to emerge over the next couple of weeks in the federal parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join with me, please, in thanking Senator Penny Wong and Senator Cory Bernardi on a terrific debate on same-sex marriage. Senator Bernardi, this for you. Senator Penny Wong, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Stand and deliver.